I had taken in 2 towering Apache sisters, but now they refused to leave my ranch. Silas Ward had pulled folks out of tight corners before. A child dragged under by a river current, a rider pinned beneath his fallen horse, a woman lost in a howling storm. Those he rescued always offered thanks, returned to their lives, and the world moved on. That was the order of things, at least it used to be. These 2, however, weren't obeying that script. Ayanna and Cassina stood nearly 7 feet tall, their elongated shadows spilling across his porch like ominous oaths. 3 days earlier, he had found them cornered by men with bloodied knuckles, traitors closing in. Without a second thought, he intervened, scattered their attackers, and brought the sisters home to heal. But instead of leaving once safe, they lingered, rooted on his front steps as though the ground itself belonged to them. They spoke softly in their own tongue, gesturing toward his herd, his fields, his very house. When he gently suggested they might want to return to their people, Ayanna fixed him with eyes sharp as blackened steel and answered in a voice that left his skin crawling. "We stay. You saved us. Now we protect you." What unsettled Silas most wasn't merely their sudden claim over his land. It was how they somehow knew things they shouldn't. They had walked straight to the hidden rifle tucked behind his water trough. They had spotted a horse's limp before he himself had noticed it. They prepared meals from roots and herbs taken from his property, plants he hadn't even realized were edible. And then there was the whisper. Cassina had leaned close to her sister one night, certain he could not hear, and let 3 words slip in flawless English, cold and sharp as morning ice. They found us. Who were they? And why did these women who owed him their lives act as though he were the one in need of protection? The first hint of answers, or perhaps more questions, arrived as a dust plume rising on the horizon. Silas shaded his eyes against the blaze of the sun, watching 3 horsemen press forward with a speed that spoke of business more urgent than neighborly calls. At their head was Rufus Garrett, broad-shouldered and squat, his face locked in the grim mask Silas had come to associate with trouble. 2 men he did not recognize trailed behind him, their hands resting far too easily on the grips of their sidearms. "Ward," Rufus bellowed before his mount had even slowed. "We need a word." Ayanna and Cassina slipped from the porch's shade like spirits of the earth, their towering presence making the armed riders shift uneasily in their saddles. Cassina's piercing gaze swept over the strangers like a blade weighing prey, while Ayanna closed the space between herself and Silas with a subtle, deliberate grace, less a stroll than a warrior stepping into formation. "About what?" Silas asked, though his gut twisted with the knowledge he already guessed. Rufus scowled and gestured at the sisters, distaste curdling in his eyes. "About them. Mrs. Henderson saw them in town yesterday when you were buying supplies." "Words moving quick, Ward," Rufus said, his tone carrying the weight of warning. "People are starting to whisper." Silas kept his voice steady. "What kind of whispers?" "The kind that don't end well for anyone." One of the unfamiliar men urged his horse a step closer. He was lean, sharp-eyed, with the wary posture of someone used to taking command. "Curtis Vale," he introduced himself. "I'm speaking on behalf of several families around here. And those Apache women, they need to be gone." Heat prickled in Silas's chest, anger rising. "They're hurt. They'll move on once they've had time to recover." Rufus's mouth twisted into something colder than a smile, his voice dropping to a low growl. "That's not how things work around here. You remember the Morrison place last year? Took in that Comanche boy. Community didn't take kindly. Burned them out. Family had to haul themselves all the way to Kansas." The words lingered in the air like smoke from embers that never truly died. Silas remembered the rumors. Neighbors one day, their ranch a blackened husk the next. The walls still scarred, silent testimony to what fear and anger could do. Cassina murmured to Ayanna in their native tongue, her eyes never straying from Vale. Ayanna's response came with the faintest nod before she spoke aloud, her English rough-edged but resolute. "These men carry bad spirit. They are afraid of what they cannot control." Vale's hand drifted toward his pistol, fingers brushing the grip with a casualness meant to look harmless, but Ayanna's sharp gaze caught it. In a heartbeat she shifted, placing her towering frame directly between Vale and Silas, her shadow swallowing them both. Cassina mirrored her sister's movement, stepping to the other side, a living barricade. "Easy now," Silas said, palms raised in an effort to calm the storm brewing before him. "Nobody's looking to stir trouble. But Vale's stare had sharpened, his eyes narrowing with recognition that cut deeper than hostility. When he spoke again, his words carried a darker certainty. "Those aren't just any Apache women, Ward. I'd stake my land on it." The air seemed to thicken, heavy like the moments before lightning splits the sky. Silas's gut churned. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, though part of him feared the answer. Vale's weathered face showed the hard knowledge of a man who had seen too many wanted sheets tacked to tavern walls. 2 tall Apache women, always together, one marked by a scar across her left palm. His gaze locked on Casina's hand where a pale line carved across her dark skin. "You're hiding the Crow Feather Sisters." The name hit Silas like a bucket of icy water. He'd heard fragments of stories, of 2 Apache women whose reputations stretched across 3 territories. Women who could stalk prey for days without rest, who knew the Earth's secrets better than the settlers who claimed it. Women said to have killed cavalry scouts with nothing but their bare hands. Ayana's jaw tightened like stone, but she did not speak to refute the charge. "Is it true?" Silas asked, his voice hushed, direct. Ayana chose her words carefully, her accent wrapping around them with deliberate weight. "Names are wind. Actions are stone. We have taken nothing from you but kindness." Rufus barked a short, bitter laugh. "Kindness? Ward, they're using you. These 2 have been hitting trade routes for months. That's why those traders were after them when you stumbled onto the fight." The memory uncoiled in Silas's mind before he could stop it. Ayana, not standing like a victim that day, but moving like a fighter pressed into a corner. Casina tending wounds with uncanny knowledge of plants she hadn't gathered in front of him, the way neither had flinched even when staring down armed men. Silas's voice came out low, edged with dawning unease. "Those men, the traitors I stopped. What were they carrying?" Vale's expression darkened, twisting into something uglier. "Provisions meant for Apache families up north. Food, medicine, blankets. These 2 ambushed the wagon train, took what they could haul and left the rest to scatter. Left good men beaten and stripped," Vale pressed, his voice carrying venom. Casina's reply came like stones grinding together, her tone raw and edged. "We only reclaim what was taken first. White traders sell rotten food to our people. They take silver, let children go hungry. We return what rightfully belongs to our families." Rufus scoffed, spitting into the dirt. "That's the tale you tell. But the marshals got warrants in their hands. $500 each, dead or alive." The figure seemed to hang in the still air, heavy and irresistible. $500 apiece. More money than most men in the territory would see in years of sweat and backbreaking work. Enough to feed every head of Silas's cattle through the winter. Enough to patch the roof of his barn, mend his fences, maybe even buy the breeding bull he'd been eyeing. All of that, if he only handed over the 2 women who had placed their trust in him. Ayana's eyes never left his face, studying him the way one might read the signs of weather in the clouds. Her voice, when it came, was certain, immovable. "You will not deliver us. Not because you are kind, though you are, but because you understand what we know." Silas's throat tightened. "And what knowledge is that supposed to be?" Before she could answer, the sound of pounding hooves rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Silas turned, squinting into the horizon. Another group was approaching, this one larger, riding with the order and precision of soldiers. He counted 6 in all, their mounts keeping perfect distance from one another despite the rough, uneven ground. At the forefront rode a man whose hair gleamed silver under the sun, his cold blue eyes scanning the scene with ruthless calculation. A badge glinted from his vest, flashing like a shard of distant lightning. 5 deputies fanned out behind him in a practiced maneuver that spoke of endless repetition. "Marshal Dalton," Vale called, his tone laced with relief. "Right on time." Dalton swung his gaze across the yard, taking in every detail, the locals, the rancher, and the 2 towering Apache women who stood as still as predators weighing the moment before a strike. His expression betrayed no shock, only the grim satisfaction of a hunter cornering quarry he had tracked a long time. "You'd be Mr. Ward," Dalton said at last, sliding from his saddle with the measured pace of a man who always controlled the tempo. "I'm Marshal Ben Dalton, and I believe you've got something that belongs to the territorial court." Ayana and Casina exchanged a glance that carried more weight than words. Without speaking, they drew in closer to Silas, one at each side, their movements deliberate, not protective but tactical, placing themselves as though they were already preparing for battle. Silas studied them then, truly studied them, and what he saw chilled him. These were not women fleeing justice. These were women who had been hunted by it. If you've come for them, Silas said carefully, voice even but edged with steel, then you'll need to state the charges first. Dalton's hand dipped into his coat. He withdrew 2 folded warrants, unfolding them with practiced precision. His voice carried the authority of written law and the threat of force behind it. Ayanna Crowfeather and Cassina Crowfeather, he announced, wanted for theft of federal provisions, for assault on registered traders, and for conspiracy to spark an Apache uprising. Combined reward $1,000. The bounty sum pulled a sharp whistle from Rufus, and even Vale's eyes widened, betraying his greed. Those are heavy charges, Silas said, his voice level but wary. They are, Dalton replied, every word carrying the weight of practiced authority. He stood like a man used to absolute obedience. The territorial government takes grave offense at anyone interfering with legitimate commerce, particularly when that interference risks stirring hostilities with the Apache tribes all over again. Katina murmured in their own tongue, her tone quick, measured, almost urgent. Ayanna listened, then lifted her chin, addressing Dalton in English without a trace of submission. Your legitimate commerce sells poisoned grain to children. Your traders dilute medicine until it heals nothing. Your government makes promises of food that never arrive. That's not your place to judge, Dalton snapped back. You set yourself as judge and executioner, and now you'll answer for it. Ayanna's reply came firm and unyielding. We have answered already. To our chief, to our families, to our ancestors. Your law carries no voice on Apache ground. You're not on Apache ground now, Dalton said flatly, the words slicing through the air like steel. The weight of the moment pressed on Silas as he realized every eye was fixed on him. The marshal expected his compliance. The bounty hunters were salivating for their reward. The neighbors wanted the threat removed. But when Silas met Ayanna's gaze, what unsettled him most wasn't fear of capture. It was fear of something else altogether. Marshal, Silas began carefully, before we speak of turning anyone over, I'll hear their side. Dalton's jaw hardened, his patience thinning. This isn't a parley ward. You shelter fugitives, and that makes you one. Stand aside or share their fate. Silas felt the weight of judgment pressing in, but it was Cassina's low whisper that froze his blood. If they take us back, we die. Not by white man's hand, by our own. Her confession, quiet enough for his ears alone, twisted everything. These women weren't merely fugitives of the territorial law, they were hunted by their own people. What do you mean? Silas muttered under his breath, but Dalton's voice cut across the air, loud and commanding. I'll give you one chance, Ward. Step aside, and it ends without blood. Resist, and I'll clap you in irons as their accomplice. On what grounds? Silas shot back. Aiding and abetting known criminals. Obstructing justice. I could name a half-dozen charges and everyone would stick. Dalton's hand drifted casually to rest on the grip of his revolver. It's your choice. Rufus leaned forward in his saddle, his tone deceptively reasonable, though his eyes betrayed eagerness for violence. Silas, don't be a fool. These women are nothing but trouble. Let them go, claim the reward, and life returns to what it was. But Ayanna stepped in close, her towering frame blotting out Dalton from Silas's view. Her voice carried urgency dressed in calm resolve. Our chief bargained with your traders, sold our young women for better prices, promised his wives to white men. Her eyes glinted like obsidian. Cassina and I were chosen first. Because of our size. Strong Apache women fetch higher price to labor in the mines. The revelation struck Silas like a blow to the chest, leaving his breath short. These weren't raiders chasing profit. They were sisters running from chains. Cassina's voice, grave and steady, sealed the truth. My sister speaks true. Cassina spoke next, her English broken but forceful. Chief Yellow Bear sells his own people. We refuse, so he names us thieves. Tells white law we are criminals. Easier than admitting he trades daughters for gold. Dalton's features didn't shift, but some of his men did. A deputy's jaw tightened, another shifted in his saddle. Even Vale looked unsettled at the accusation. A convenient tale, the marshal said coldly. But the evidence says otherwise. You attacked licensed traders, seized federal property, left 3 men battered and bleeding. Ayanna's reply came swift and cutting. We took only what belonged to our children. Food that would rot in wagons while little ones went hungry. Medicine spoiled before it ever reached our people. We harmed no one who did not first strike at us. That isn't how the law works, Dalton countered. Silas let his gaze travel over the gathering. Dalton stood as unreadable as stone, yet his deputies traded uneasy looks. Rufus's confidence had begun to fray, and even Vale's certainty seemed eroded. Everyone knew the whispers about crooked Indian agents, about traitors skimming off the top, about barrels of spoiled grain and watered-down tonics that never saved the sick. Everyone knew, but few dared say it aloud. "Marshal," Silas began, choosing his words with care, "if these women are right about their chief selling them into forced marriages, wouldn't sending them back be worse than prison?" Dalton's jaw twitched. "That is not my duty. I enforce territorial law. Tribal affairs are not my concern." But one of his deputies urged his horse a step forward. He was young, with the kind of honest trouble on his face that comes from conscience. "Sir, if I may, Martinez Mining's been advertising in the territorial papers. They're paying chiefs for Indian wives, offering big money for women strong enough to work the camps." The words hung in the air like black powder waiting for a spark. Dalton's eyes narrowed, turning on him like a whip. "Deputy Collins, you are out of line." "But Marshal," Collins pressed, though his voice faltered under the weight of that glare. "If Martinez is buying Apache women for the mines, and these two ran to escape it," he broke off, cowed, but the damage was done. Silas could see it. The shift in the others. Rufus suddenly fascinated by his own boots, Vale swallowing hard like something sour had lodged in his throat. The other deputies glancing at one another with unease. Dalton tried to slam the door shut. "Martinez Mining operates under a territorial license. Their hiring arrangements are not our concern." "Hiring arrangements?" Ayana's words dripped with scorn sharp enough to chill fire. "You dress slavery in fine words, but chains still cut flesh." Cassina stepped forward, silent no more. She pulled up her sleeve to expose the old marks etched into her skin, dark grooves circling her wrist, the unmistakable scars of rope. Her voice was steady as stone. "Yellow Bear let Martinez men test us before. Check our arms. Look at our teeth like livestock. When we refused, Chief called us thieves, made us criminals to sell his honor." The faded scars said more than words ever could. Silas felt his stomach turn to ice as the weight of their truth sank deep. These women had not only fled the law, they had fled chains. "That changes nothing," Dalton insisted, though the brittle edge was gone from his voice. "Warrants are warrants." "The law is the law. Whose law?" Silas asked softly, the question landing heavier than he expected. It seemed to startle the men around him, including himself. Once said, it could not be swallowed back. Whose law allowed a man to barter women like stock? Whose law permitted government agents to ship spoiled grain to starving children? Or whose law gave a man the right to protect innocents who'd taken refuge on his land? Dalton's hand drifted nearer his holster. "Careful, Ward, you're stepping on thin ice." "Maybe so." Silas looked slowly over the gathered faces, then met Dalton's cold stare. "But I've made my choice. Those two remain on my ranch until they choose to go." "You're making a choice that will cost you everything," Dalton warned. "Perhaps," Silas admitted, "but it will be my choice to make." Rufus leaned in from his saddle, anger flushing his features. "Silas, think about this. The territorial government won't stand for it. Neither will the neighbors." "Then your neighbors will live with their consciences," Silas shot back. Vale spat into the dust. "This isn't finished, Ward, not by a long shot." Dalton studied Silas with the measured cruelty of a man weighing options, then glanced at his deputies. Several avoided his gaze. Collins met the sister's eyes with an impossible sympathy. "I'll be back," Dalton said at last, voice hard as a whip, "with federal marshals and a federal warrant. When we return, anyone harboring these fugitives will be taken into custody on sight." He swung onto his horse with jerky impatience, then paused and fixed Silas with a stare that promised consequences. "You've got 48 hours to change your mind, Ward. After that, it becomes a federal matter." As the marshal and his men faded into the dust, Ayana set a broad hand on Silas's shoulder. "You have chosen a road that leads to fire," she said quietly. "We cannot let you burn for us." That night, Silas found the sisters packing to leave. They folded what little they owned into tight bundles meant to be slung and carried. Their motions were economical and nearly soundless. Ayana checked straps and balanced loads while Cassina kept watch, her gaze sweeping the dark like someone memorizing escape paths. "Running off in the dark won't fix anything," Silas called from the porch. Ayana rose slowly, her face unreadable in the lamplight spilling from his windows. "We bring death to your door. Better that we face what's coming than that you bear the flames for our sake. My fate is mine to choose, she added. Choice? Kasina's laugh was hollow. You think white law hands out choices? Federal marshals come with guns, not with questions. They shoot first and count later. Silas stepped down from the porch and closed the distance between himself and the two women who had fallen into his care. Maybe, he said quietly. But I've heard what happens to those delivered to the Martinez mines. I've heard the rumors. Rumors? Ayanna echoed sharply. What rumors? The kind about Apache women who go into those camps and never return. Work gangs that shrink month by month. Graves with no names, he met her directly. Your chief isn't selling you into marriage. He's selling you into death. The sisters exchanged a long, wordless look only kin could share. When Ayanna spoke again, exhaustion had thinned her voice and added years to her features. Yellow Bear lost 3 sons to white soldiers 5 winters past. His heart turned to stone, his mind to gold. He says the Apache must change or we die. But it is he who decides who adapts and who perishes, Ayanna continued, her tone like iron. That's why you took the supplies, Silas realized aloud. Children went hungry while traders sold grain to white settlements for higher prices. Babies died of fever while medicine sat locked in warehouses waiting to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Kasina's hands curled into fists. We would not stand by while our people suffered for one man's greed. Silas's thoughts wandered unbidden to his own past. The choices he'd made or refused to make. The times he'd turned away from injustice because it was easier to stay silent. He thought of the Morrison family, burned out for sheltering a single Comanche boy. Other neighbors who had simply vanished after crossing the wrong people. How many times had he looked away? How many others has Yellow Bear sold? He asked grimly. 6 women this season, Ayanna said, her voice hardening to steel. All young, all strong. Martinez pays 50 silver for each, along with promises of richer trade agreements. 3 are already dead. The mines crush men. For women who resist, they kill faster. The numbers struck Silas like a hammer blow. If the territorial government was offering $1,000 for these 2 women, it meant they were a danger to someone's profit. No wonder Dalton had wanted to seize them quickly rather than listen. Then came a sound that froze them all. Horses. Many of them, moving fast through the night over rough ground. Too many for casual visitors. They come sooner than expected, Kasina whispered. Silas listened to the drumbeat of hooves. 10 at least, maybe more. Federal marshals rarely traveled in groups that large unless they were preparing for battle. Get to the barn, he ordered. There's a root cellar hidden behind the feed bins. You can reach it through the back wall. We will not hide while you stand against danger for us, Ayanna said firmly. You'll hide if I tell you, Silas snapped. This is my ranch. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the rhythm wasn't right. These weren't disciplined marshals. The hoofbeats came from the east round or from Apache land. The cadence was broken, scattered, the sound of a war party. They emerged from the shadows like spirits drawn from smoke. A dozen Apache warriors astride painted horses, their faces streaked with war paint that gleamed under the moon. At their head rode a man whose presence carried the weight of command. His gray braids glimmered with silver ornaments that caught the starlight. Chief Yellow Bear. Ayanna and Kasina moved instantly, stepping forward to form a living barrier between Silas and the advancing warriors. Their massive silhouettes carved defiance against the pale night, a wall of flesh and will that even mounted men could not ignore. My daughters, Yellow Bear called in measured English, his voice heavy with ritual authority. You have stained our people with shame. Come back and face judgment. Ayanna's answer rang sharp across the yard. We are not your daughters anymore. You sold that bond for Martinez silver. The chief's expression darkened, thunderclouds gathering in his face. I secured marriages that would strengthen our tribe. You spit on Apache tradition. Kasina's retort came like a lash. Tradition does not sell women as if they were horses. Tradition does not let children starve while chiefs fatten themselves on white man's gold. Yellow Bear's hand drifted to his tomahawk, and several of his warriors shifted restlessly in their saddles. Silas's gut knotted. The fight was seconds away from exploding. Chief Yellow Bear, Silas called, stepping forward despite Ayanna's arm thrown out to block him. These women are under my protection. They have committed no crime here. The chief's reply came like ice. White man holds no authority over Apache justice. My daughters broke tribal law. They will return and face their sentence. And that sentence is marriage to the Martinez men as agreed. If they refuse again, Yellow Bear declared, his voice carrying the weight of judgment, they will be cast out. No family, no clan, no name. They will become nothing. Silas noticed Ayana's shoulders tense at the decree. He knew what it meant, and among the Apache, exile was a punishment worse than death. To be cut off from tribe and kin was to vanish, to become invisible, stripped of meaning in a world where belonging defined existence. There's another way, Silas said softly. Yellow Bear's eyes narrowed. Speak it. They remain here on my land under my protection, Silas answered. I'll pay whatever bride price Martinez offered, and more besides, to settle any wrongs they've been accused of. The words lingered in the night air like smoke curling from a dying fire. Warriors muttered to one another in low tones, and Yellow Bear regarded Silas with sharp, calculating eyes. You would claim them as your wives? The chief asked at last. I would claim them as members of my household, Silas said firmly, free to walk the path they choose. If they wish to leave, they may. If they wish to stay, they will. The decision is theirs, not yours, not mine. Yellow Bear's expression flickered with thought, but before he could shape a reply, the thunder of hooves split the night again. This time from the opposite direction. Torches flared in the darkness, flames casting jagged light as riders emerged, guns already drawn. Federal marshals, right on Dalton's promised schedule. Hold it right there, Dalton's voice cracked through the night like a whip. Nobody moves. This is federal jurisdiction. In that instant, Silas realized the trap he was in. Apache warriors at his front, marshals at his back. Two towering women refusing to yield to either side. The balance of it felt like standing on a blade's edge. One wrong breath and blood would spill. The silence that followed was unbearable, stretched taut as a rope ready to break. 12 Apache warriors glared across the yard at 8 armed marshals, torchlight dancing across war paint and badges, steel and skin. Shadows leapt on the ground like omens of violence. Dalton shattered the quiet first. Chief Yellow Bear, he barked. Those women are fugitives of the United States. Step aside. Yellow Bear's reply came steady and hard as stone. They are Apache. They answer to Apache law. Not anymore, they don't, Ayana said suddenly, her voice cutting across the night. Every syllable rang with finality. We choose different law. We choose to remain with Silas Ward. The declaration sent ripples through both groups. Warriors whispered to each other in low tones. Marshals shifted uneasily in their saddles. You cannot choose so easily, Yellow Bear growled, though doubt had edged into his voice. Yes, we can, Cassina countered, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with her sister. Apache law says a woman may claim the protection of the man who saves her life. Silas Ward saved us. We claim his protection. Silas blinked in astonishment. That's true? A very old law, Ayana confirmed. Older than Yellow Bear's bargains with white merchants. If the chief forces us from the sanctuary of our savior, he breaks sacred tradition himself. Yellow Bear's face hardened, his fury flashing in the torchlight. Yet several of his warriors exchanged nods, acknowledgement of a custom older than his authority. Even a chief could not openly defy tribal law that had existed long before his rule. Marshal Dalton spurred his horse forward. That doesn't erase the federal warrants. Actually, it complicates them. Deputy Collins spoke up carefully, his voice subdued but firm enough to draw sharp glares from his superior. If they're invoking Apache protection rights and they stand on private land with the owner's blessing, jurisdiction isn't so clear. Dalton's head snapped toward him. Complicated how? Collins swallowed but continued. Territorial law acknowledges tribal customs in civil disputes. If this is a matter of protection under tradition, then it's civil, not criminal, not harboring. He faltered under Dalton's searing glare, but the crack had already opened. Silas seized the chance. Marshal, these women have broken no law on my land. They've worked my ranch, tended my stock, caused no trouble. If they remain here as hired hands, that's between them and me. He pressed harder, voice gaining strength. Those warrants came from traders who may have been crooked themselves. If they were selling spoiled supplies to starving families, then what happened wasn't theft at all. It was recovery. That makes this a civil matter, not a crime. Dalton's jaw flexed, the truth closing around him like a snare. Pursuing the sisters meant exposing the traders' corruption, and by extension, Martinez's arrangement with tribal chiefs. It would drag the territorial office into scandal. Yellow Bear watched the exchange, his expression shifting as understanding settled in. "So you would keep them as laborers?" "I would keep them as whatever they choose to be," Silas answered plainly. "Hands for the ranch, family, partners, as long as they wish to stay." His eyes found the sisters. "The decision is theirs." Ayana and Cassina shared one of their silent, wordless glances. Then Ayana spoke, her voice as steady as bedrock. "We stay. This is our home now." Yellow Bear held their gaze for a long, heavy moment. Finally, he inclined his head. "Apache law is satisfied. You have chosen your path." Dalton turned in his saddle, scanning the circle of faces. Apache warriors who had accepted their chief's ruling, deputies who no longer stood firmly behind him, and a rancher who had just outmaneuvered federal law by sheer conviction. "This isn't finished," Dalton muttered, but the words rang hollow. "Yes, it is," Silas replied, final as a gavel. 3 months later, Silas leaned on his porch rail, watching Ayana and Cassina work the garden behind his house. The sound of their laughter rose with the morning breeze, warm and unguarded. They never spoke of leaving again. His ranch had become their refuge, and in return they had become his fiercest guardians. The neighbors still whispered, but no one dared test the arrangement. The towering Apache sisters who had once refused to leave had found their place, and Silas Ward, against all odds, had found a family.